Tessa stood frozen in the sterile hospital corridor, her knuckles turning white as she gripped the denial letter that condemned her brother. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, a cold and indifferent sound that matched the sinking dread in her stomach. Across the city, beneath the shadow of a monolithic glass tower, Mason Kellen was stopped by a security guard's heavy hand. Rain dripped from the brim of his cap, obscuring eyes that held a sharp, terrifying intelligence usually hidden from the rich. He didn't argue with the guard, merely glancing at the surveillance camera with a look that promised a reckoning was coming. They were two invisible souls in a city built on power, separated by miles but bound by a cruelty they hadn't yet named. While Tessa fought to breathe under the weight of a debt she couldn't pay, Mason was calculating the exact cost of bringing the tower down. Watch closely, because the man parking the luxury cars knows exactly where the bodies are buried, and he is done waiting. The envelope sat on the kitchen table like a dormant explosive waiting for a spark. Tessa stared at the red stamp across the front, the sum inside enough to shatter her life. Her brother coughed in the next room, a rasping sound that tore through the thin walls. She had worked double shifts for months, skipping meals, selling what little she owned. But the hospital system was a machine designed to grind people down into dust and profit. The invoice wasn't just a bill, it was a leverage point manufactured by a distant algorithm. Mason had warned her about the patterns he saw in the billing cycles, but she hadn't listened. He had told her that the timing of these rejections wasn't random, but she was too afraid. Now fear was replaced by a cold realization that the system wasn't broken, it was rigged. She picked up the phone, her fingers trembling as she dialed the number for the billing department. A robotic voice answered, cycling her through endless loops of apathy and calculated delays. This was the weaponization of bureaucracy, designed to make her give up and sign anything. She didn't know that her name had already been flagged in a database downtown. The predator watching her account wasn't a computer, but a woman in a high-rise office. Celeste Harrington reviewed the file on her tablet, sipping sparkling water with precise elegance. She needed a test subject for the new debt acquisition protocol, and Tessa was perfect. Vulnerable, desperate, and employed within the very network Celeste intended to dominate. The invoice was the hook, but the lawsuit would be the net that dragged her in. Celeste swiped the screen, approving the acceleration of the debt to a collection agency. It was a simple transaction for her, a move of a pawn on a chessboard she owned. But she had no idea that the pawn was protected by a knight in disguise. Mason felt the shift in the air the moment he saw Tessa's face that evening. He stood by the parking garage booth, his uniform ill-fitting but his posture rigid. She didn't have to say a word, the slump of her shoulders told the whole story. He wanted to tell her everything then, to reveal the history he kept locked away. But revealing his true self now would endanger the trap he had spent years building. He had to let her hurt a little longer to ensure the enemy was fully exposed. His silence was a heavy weight, a necessary cruelty that burned in his chest. Tessa walked past him, her eyes red-rimmed, too ashamed to meet his steady gaze. She didn't know he had memorized the license plate of the lawyer who authorized her debt. She didn't see the notebook tucked into his vest, filled with dates and arrival times. Mason watched her disappear into the rain, his hand clenching into a fist by his side. He knew the game was escalating, moving from financial pressure to legal warfare. The invoice was just the opening shot in a battle for her soul. And he was the only one who brought ammunition to a knife fight. The city lights reflected in the puddles, distorting the world into something jagged. Tessa reached her apartment, only to find a second notice taped to her door. This one wasn't from the hospital, it was a legal summons requiring her appearance. The time frame was impossible, the demands absolute, designed to force a settlement. She sank to the floor, the paper crinkling in her hand, the trap snapping shut. In the darkness of the hallway, she felt truly alone, abandoned by the world. But shadows can hide protectors as well as monsters, if you know where to look. Mason sat in his small booth, monitoring the exit of the executive elevator bank. He saw Celeste Harrington's car approach, the sleek black sedan gleaming under the lights. He opened the gate, his face blank, playing the part of the invisible servant. She didn't even look at him, her gaze fixed on her phone, dismissing his existence. That was her mistake, the arrogance that blinded her to the threat at her window. He noted the time, the passenger, and the folder she left on the back seat. What if the man holding the keys held the lock to her destruction? The underground garage was a kingdom of concrete and exhaust, a place of echoes. Mason moved through the shadows with the silent grace of a man who didn't want to be seen. His job was to park cars, but his mission was to catalog the sins of the owners. He knew which partners were having affairs, and which were laundering money. Tonight, the air was thick with the tension of a late-night merger meeting upstairs. He had been ordered to keep the VIP section clear for the partners of the firm. This proximity gave him access to conversations meant for soundproof boardrooms. He found himself standing near the service entrance, a door rarely used by the elite. Voices drifted through the ventilation shaft, distorted but distinct enough to understand. He recognized Celeste's sharp, commanding tone, cutting through the murmurs of men. They were discussing the hospital acquisition, a deal built on bad debt and broken lives. Mason pulled a small recorder from his pocket, pressing it against the cold metal grate. He was risking everything. One check by security would end his investigation instantly. But the mention of Tessa's last name made his blood run cold and focused. They weren't just buying the hospital, they were harvesting the donor list for leverage. It was a scheme so vile it made the damp garage feel like a sanctuary of purity. Mason listened as they laughed about the compliance rate of desperate families. He realized Tessa wasn't just a victim, she was a specific target for something larger. A sudden noise behind him, the squeal of tires, forced him to pocket the device. He turned to see a luxury SUV speeding toward the exit, ignoring the lane markers. He stepped out to flag them down, adhering to the strict protocol of the garage. The driver rolled down the window, a young associate with fear in his eyes. He shoved a ticket at Mason, his hands shaking, smelling faintly of shredded paper. "Don't log this," the man whispered, pressing $100 bill into Mason's palm. Mason looked at the money, then at the man, seeing the cracks in the armor. He took the bill but noted the license plate and the time in his mental ledger. "Standard rate applies, sir," Mason said, his voice flat, returning the bribe. The associate sped off, leaving Mason with a new thread to pull in the web. He walked back to his booth, his mind racing with the implications of the meeting. This wasn't just corporate greed, it was a systematic extraction of human dignity. He needed to get closer to the executive floor, but his access card was restricted. That was when he saw the cleaning crew arriving for the night shift, pushing carts. Invisibility was his superpower, and uniforms were just costumes to be changed. He knew the schedule, the routes, and the blind spots of every camera. If he wanted to save Tessa, he had to stop being the guard and become the ghost. He swapped his vest for a gray jumpsuit left in the locker room laundry bin. The fit was tight, but it covered his own clothes enough to pass a casual glance. Pushing a cart of cleaning supplies, he entered the freight elevator, heart hammering. The numbers climbed: lobby, 10, 20, 30, rising toward the penthouse suites. He was ascending into the belly of the beast, armed only with his wits. The doors opened to the plush carpet of the executive wing, silent and imposing. He was at the wrong door for a parking attendant, but the right one for a spy. He approached Celeste's office, the glass frosted, a sliver of light beneath. She was still there, the silhouette of her perfect posture visible against the window. He pretended to polish the brass handle of the adjacent door, straining to hear. She was on the phone, her voice dropping to a whisper that carried terror. "If the audit happens before the gala, we lose everything," she hissed. Mason paused, his hand freezing on the rag, a grim smile touching his lips. She had just given him the timeline, the weapon, and the deadline. The morning sun brought no warmth, only the harsh reality of the mail slot. A courier had delivered a thick packet, sealed with red wax that looked like dried blood. Tessa tore it open, her hands shaking so hard she nearly ripped the documents inside. It was a notification of transfer. Her debt now belonged to Harrington Associates. The names sounded elegant, but the terms outlined were barbaric and predatory. They demanded immediate payment of the full sum, plus interest and legal fees. Or, she could appear at their offices to discuss alternative repayment options. She went to work, but the hospital felt different, like a prison she helped maintain. Every patient she billed felt like she was betraying them, feeding them to the wolves. Her supervisor, a woman who usually smiled, avoided eye contact all morning. Tessa realized the rot had spread. The hospital administration was complicit. She cornered her boss in the break room, demanding to know why the debt was sold. "It's out of my hands, Tessa," the woman whispered, looking at the door nervously. "They bought the whole portfolio. You're not an employee anymore, you're an asset." The word asset hung in the air, dehumanizing and terrifying in its clarity. Tessa left the hospital early, her chest tight, feeling the walls closing in. She went to the only place that felt real, the small park near the law firm. Mason was there on his break, sitting on a bench, feeding pigeons with stale bread. He looked up as she approached, his eyes scanning her face for damage. "They sold it," she said, her voice cracking, the tears finally spilling over. He didn't offer empty platitudes, he simply moved over to make space for her. "I know," Mason said quietly, his voice a low rumble that vibrated with anger. "They want you to panic. They want you to run to them and beg for mercy." Tessa looked at him, surprised by the intensity and certainty in his tone. "How do you know what they want?" "You parked their cars, Mason." He looked away, watching the glass tower that loomed over them like a tombstone. "I watch them," he said simply. "I see how they treat things they own." He handed her a handkerchief, clean and pressed, contrasting with his rough hands. "Don't sign anything," he instructed, his eyes locking onto hers with intensity. "Go to the meeting. Listen to them. But do not put your pen to paper." Tessa felt a strange comfort in his command, a stability she desperately needed. "What choice do I have? My brother needs the treatment, Mason." "You have leverage you don't see yet," he said, cryptic and maddeningly calm. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. "If they corner you, ask them about the shell company in the Cayman Islands." Tessa stared at the paper, then at him, confusion warring with gratitude. "What is this? How do you know about shell companies?" "I read a lot," he lied smoothly, standing up as his break time ended. "Trust me, Tessa. They are afraid of something, and you are the key." She watched him walk back to the garage, his stride purposeful and heavy. She realized then that she didn't know Mason Kellen at all. But for the first time in weeks, she felt a spark of hope ignite. She walked into the Harrington building an hour later, clutching the note. The lobby was a cathedral of marble and intimidation, designed to make her feel small. The receptionist sneered at her worn coat, directing her to the unauthorized lift. She rose to the 40th floor, the pressure building in her ears and her heart. She was walking into the lion's den, armed with a parking attendant's secret. The doors opened, revealing a world of hushed wealth and silent violence. And sitting at the end of the long conference table was Celeste Harrington. Celeste did not stand when Tessa entered the room, she merely gestured to a chair. The office was a masterpiece of minimalism, void of any personal warmth or clutter. "Miss Winford," Celeste said, her voice like silk wrapped around a razor blade. "I believe we have a mutual problem that requires a creative solution." Tessa sat, clutching her purse, feeling the disparity in their worlds acutely. "I can't pay the full amount," Tessa said, her voice steady despite the fear. "I need a payment plan. Something reasonable. My brother is sick." Celeste smiled, a practiced expression that didn't reach her cold, calculating eyes. "We don't do payment plans for high-risk assets," she said dismissively. "However, I have reviewed your file. You have access to the hospital archives." Tessa stiffened. "I'm a billing clerk. I don't have access to medical records." "But you have a login," Celeste countered, sliding a document across the table. We need to verify some data regarding legacy claims. For audit purposes. The request hung in the air, innocent in wording but sinister in intent. You want me to spy on patients? Tessa asked, the realization hitting her hard. I want you to verify data. In exchange, we forgive your brother's debt entirely. The offer was staggering freedom from the crushing weight that was drowning her. All she had to do was cross a moral line she had sworn to defend. Tessa looked at the document, the legal jargon designed to mask the crime. She thought of Mason's note in her pocket, the strange leverage he had given her. She took a breath, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. And what about the Cayman accounts? Tessa asked, her voice trembling slightly. The room went deathly silent. The air conditioner seemed to stop humming. Celeste's smile vanished instantly, replaced by a look of predatory sharpness. Where did you hear that? She whispered, her eyes narrowing into slits. Tessa realized Mason's intel was real. It was dangerous. It was a weapon. I read a lot, Tessa echoed Mason's words, feeling a surge of adrenaline. Celeste leaned forward, her demeanor shifting from dismissive to dangerous. You are playing a game you do not understand, little girl, Celeste hissed. If you mention that again, the debt won't be your only problem. She pressed a button on her desk, and the heavy oak doors clicked open. You have 24 hours to sign the agreement. Or we seize your brother's care. The threat was explicit: become a spy or watch her brother die. Tessa stood up, her legs shaking, and walked out without looking back. She had struck a nerve, but she had also painted a target on her back. Down in the lobby, she gasped for air, the adrenaline crashing into fear. She needed to find Mason. She needed to know what she had just started. But as she exited the building, she saw Celeste standing on the mezzanine. The woman was on her phone, watching Tessa with a look of cold calculation. Tessa realized the help was never real, it was always a trap. She had refused the bait, but now she was inside the cage. And the lock was controlled by a woman who didn't know how to lose. The charity drive was mandatory for all low-level staff at the hospital. Tessa sorted through piles of old clothes, her mind still reeling from the meeting. She was on autopilot, folding coats, when she felt a stiff envelope in a pocket. It was a heavy wool coat, expensive, the kind a partner at a firm would wear. She pulled out the letter, sealed with no markings, tucked deep in the lining. Curiosity warred with caution, but the paper felt significant, deliberate. She opened it, finding a single sheet of paper with a list of dates and names. The handwriting was jagged, hurried, as if written in a moment of panic. At the top of the list was her brother's name. Next to its subject 14 viable. Her blood ran cold. This wasn't a donation, it was a drop. Someone put this here. She looked around the donation center, scanning the faces of the volunteers. Mason was there, unloading boxes from a truck, his cap pulled low. He wasn't looking at her, but his position gave him a clear view of her station. Had he planted it? Or was he protecting the person who did? She shoved the letter into her own pocket, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm. Later, in the safety of the linen closet, she examined the list more closely. It detailed adverse events intentionally triggered to increase billing cycles. They weren't just overcharging, they were making patients sicker to keep them longer. The realization was nauseating. Her brother wasn't just sick, he was being farmed. And Celeste Harrington was the architect of the harvest. The coat belonged to a whistleblower who had likely been silenced or fired. She found Mason by the loading dock, grabbing his arm with desperate force. You knew, she hissed, holding the letter up between them like a shield. You knew what they were doing to him. Why didn't you tell me? Mason looked at the letter, his expression softening into profound sorrow. I suspected, he admitted. I needed proof. That letter. It's the smoking gun. Who put it there? She demanded, tears streaming down her face. Someone who couldn't save themselves, so they tried to save you, he said. We have to go to the police, Tessa said, turning toward the exit. Mason grabbed her shoulder, stopping her. No. The police are on her payroll. Then what do we do? She cried, feeling the walls of the trap closing in. We wait for the gala, Mason said, his voice hard as steel. She's announcing the acquisition publicly. We hit her when the lights are brightest. It's suicide, Tessa whispered. She'll destroy us. She's already destroyed us, Mason said. Now we return the favor. He took the letter from her, folding it carefully into his vest pocket. I need you to trust me one more time, he said, his eyes searching hers. Get into that gala. I don't care how. Be there when the mic turns on. Tessa looked at the humble parking attendant and saw a general at war. She nodded, a silent pact sealed in the grim fluorescent light of the dock. She would walk into the fire, because she had nothing left to burn. But she didn't know that the coat had a tracker sewn into the collar. The gala was a display of obscene wealth, a sea of diamonds and black ties. Tessa wore a simple dress she had altered herself, feeling like an imposter. She had used her staff access to slip in as a server, holding a tray of champagne. Her eyes scanned the room for Celeste, who held court in the center like a queen. Mason was outside, communicating via a cheap earpiece hidden in her hair. She's moving to the stage in 5 minutes, Mason's voice crackled in her ear. Get close to the projector. I need you to plug in the drive when I say. Tessa moved through the crowd, dodging groping hands and dismissive glances. She felt the USB drive in her sash, burning against her skin like a brand. Celeste stepped up to the podium, the spotlight catching the jewels at her throat. Tonight, we celebrate a new era of healthcare, Celeste announced, beaming. The crowd applauded, oblivious to the blood on the hands they were clapping for. Tessa reached the AV booth, partially hidden by a massive floral arrangement. She saw the technician distracted by his phone. It was now or never. Now, Mason commanded. Tessa lunged forward, inserting the drive. But a hand clamped around her wrist, iron-strong and painful. It was the head of security, his face a mask of professional violence. Lost, Miss Winford? He sneered, twisting her arm behind her back. The tray of champagne crashed to the floor, the sound shattering the hush. Every head turned. The spotlight swung from Celeste to Tessa. Celeste didn't look surprised, she looked delighted. She had anticipated this. It seems we have a crasher, Celeste said into the microphone, calm and amused. A disgruntled former employee, sadly addicted to drama and theft. She gestured to the security guards. Please, escort her out gently. The humiliation was total. Tessa was dragged across the ballroom floor. Cameras flashed, capturing her shame, her tear-streaked face, her cheap dress. She had failed. The drive wasn't plugged in. The truth was still silent. Mason watched from the monitors in the van outside, his fist slamming the dash. They threw her out the back in trance, into the mud of the alleyway. Stay away, or the next time we won't be gentle, the guard spat. Tessa lay in the dirt, her dress ruined, her spirit broken. She had tried to be brave, and she had been crushed like an insect. But as she tried to stand, she realized something. The guard hadn't searched her other pocket. She still had the phone she had swiped from the AV booth during the struggle. It wasn't over. It was just getting dirty. Mason pulled up in his battered truck, jumping out to help her up. He didn't say I told you so. He wrapped his jacket around her shaking shoulders. She knew, Tessa sobbed. She was waiting for me. She thinks she won, Mason said, wiping mud from her cheek. But she just gave us a public witness list. Every person there saw you. They saw a thief. Tessa cried. No, Mason corrected. They saw a victim. And victims make the best avengers. Mason's apartment was a single room, but the walls were covered in paper. He had turned his home into a war room, connecting the dots of the conspiracy. Tessa sat on his cot, nursing a cup of tea, staring at the complexity of it. "You're not just a parking attendant," she whispered, looking at the charts. "I am now," Mason said, avoiding the question, focusing on his notebook. He opened the ledger he kept in his vest, the one Celeste ignored. It contained the arrival and departure times of every board member for 2 years. "Look at this," he pointed to a recurring pattern of late-night entries. "Every Tuesday at 2 a.m., a car with diplomatic plates arrives." "Diplomatic?" Tessa asked. "Why would a law firm meet with diplomats?" "To move money across borders without oversight," Mason explained. "And the car belongs to the Minister of Health's private attaché." The implication was staggering. The government was in on the scheme. Celeste wasn't just buying debt, she was laundering bribes through the hospital. Mason traced a line on the map. "They meet here. The old warehouse district." "We need a picture," Tessa said, her voice hardening. "We need proof of the meeting." "It's dangerous," Mason warned. "These aren't lawyers. They're fixers." "I don't care," Tessa said. "They humiliated me. I want them to bleed." Mason looked at her, seeing the change. The victim was gone, the fighter remained. "Tonight is Tuesday," Mason said, checking his watch. "Grab your coat. We're going hunting." They drove to the warehouse district in Mason's truck, parking blocks away. The rain provided cover as they crept through the shadows of the shipping containers. They saw the black sedan arrive, followed by Celeste's personal limousine. Mason pulled out a camera with a telephoto lens, professional grade. "Where did you get that?" Tessa whispered. "Remnants of a past life," he murmured, snapping the shutter rapidly. Through the lens, they saw Celeste hand a briefcase to a man in a trench coat. The exchange was classic, almost cliché, but undeniably illegal. Mason captured the faces, the briefcase, the license plates. "We got it," he whispered, a thrill of victory in his voice. But then, the man in the trench coat looked directly at their hiding spot. He tapped his earpiece. A spotlight from a guard tower swept over them. "Run," Mason commanded, grabbing Tessa's hand. They sprinted through the maze of containers, footsteps thundering behind them. They reached the truck just as a bullet sparked against the metal bumper. Mason floored the gas, the tires screeching as they peeled away. Tessa clutched the camera to her chest, her heart racing faster than the engine. "They shot at us," she screamed, the reality of the danger setting in. "They're scared," Mason said, his eyes glued to the rearview mirror. "People only shoot when they have everything to lose." They had the evidence. Now they just had to survive long enough to use it. Safe in a 24-hour diner, they reviewed the photos on a laptop Mason produced. The man in the trench coat wasn't just an attaché, he was a known cleaner. "I recognize him," Mason said, his face pale. "He works for the cartel." "Cartel?" Tessa choked on her coffee. "We're dealing with a law firm. Harrington Associates is a front," Mason revealed. "For washing drug money." The hospital bills were the wash cycle. Small, unverified payments from thousands of people. It was brilliant. Who audits poor people's medical debt? No one. Mason pulled up a hidden file on the USB drive Tessa had failed to plug in. He had decrypted it while she slept. It was the whistleblower file. It contained the original algorithm code, showing how it inflated bills artificially. This code. Mason stared at the screen, his expression unreadable. "What about it?" Tessa asked, leaning closer. "It's my code," he whispered. "I wrote this 10 years ago." The silence at the table was heavy, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator. "You wrote the code that ruined my life?" Tessa asked, pulling away. I wrote it to optimize logistics, Mason said, his voice desperate. Celeste stole it. She twisted it. That's why I'm here, Tessa. You're not a parking attendant. Who are you? She demanded. I was her partner, Mason confessed. Before she framed me and took everything. You were one of them, she accused, standing up. I was young and blind. Now I'm the only one who can stop it. Tessa stared at him, betrayal warring with the logic of his actions. So this is revenge for you. And I'm just the collateral damage. No, Mason said, reaching for her hand but stopping short. You were the wake-up call. I was hiding. You made me fight. He turned the laptop around. Look at the metadata. She modified it last week. To target my brother specifically, Tessa realized, seeing the log. She knows I'm a threat. She's trying to bury me before I find this. We have the connection now, Mason said. The cartel, the firm, the hospital. But we can't go to the police. They'll bury the evidence. We need to leak it, Tessa said. To everyone. All at once. Not yet, Mason cautioned. If we leak it now, she flees. We need to trap her in a lie under oath, he plotted. The lawsuit. The hearing is in 2 days. We use the court case to introduce the evidence, Mason decided. But first, Tessa said, a cold determination in her eyes. I need to go back to work. I need to act like I'm beaten. It's dangerous, Mason warned. It's necessary, she countered. She needs to think she won. They sat in the booth, partners in crime, bound by a terrible secret. The sunrise painted the sky in shades of bruised purple and blood red. The endgame had begun. Tessa walked into the hospital with her head down, playing the part of the broken woman. But the atmosphere was different. The silence was heavier, more accusatory. Her ID badge didn't work at the secure door. The red light blinked mockingly. Security was waiting for her. Not to arrest her, but to escort her. HR wants to see you, the guard said, avoiding her eyes. They marched her past her colleagues, who looked away in collective shame. It was a public execution of her career, staged for maximum impact. In the HR office, a woman she had never met sat with a thin file. Due to the incident at the gala, the woman began, monotone and bored. And irregularities in your billing conduct, we are restructuring your role. You're firing me? Tessa asked, almost relieved. No. That would trigger unemployment benefits, the woman smiled thinly. You are being reassigned. To the custodial staff. Effective immediately. It was a demotion designed to humiliate, to force her to quit. Tessa felt the sting of tears but swallowed them down. I accept, she said, shocking the HR director. I need the insurance for my brother. I'll scrub floors if I have to. The director blinked, clearly expecting a scene. Very well. Report to the basement. Tessa was stripped of her clerk uniform and handed a gray jumpsuit. It was identical to the one Mason had worn. The uniform of the invisible. She walked the halls she used to manage, now pushing a mop bucket. Celeste appeared an hour later, touring the facility with the hospital board. She stopped when she saw Tessa scrubbing a stain near the elevator. Proper allocation of resources, Celeste remarked to the board members. Everyone finds their natural level eventually. Tessa gripped the mop handle, her knuckles white, channeling her rage. She didn't look up. She didn't speak. She just scrubbed. But as Celeste walked away, Tessa noticed something. Celeste had dropped a tissue. Tessa swept it up, about to toss it. But she saw lipstick on it, and something else, a smudge of ink. She unfolded it carefully. It was a note, scribbled and discarded. Audit imminent. Burn the physical logs. Sector 4. Tessa's heart leaped. Sector 4 was the basement archives. Celeste wasn't just touring, she was signaling the cleanup crew. The demotion had put Tessa exactly where she needed to be. She texted Mason from the supply closet Sector 4. Tonight. Fire. She realized her demotion wasn't a punishment, it was an opportunity. Celeste's arrogance had blinded her to the danger of the help. Tessa looked at herself in the dirty mirror, the gray jumpsuit baggy and rough. She didn't look like a clerk anymore. She looked like a soldier. She filled her bucket with fresh water, but her mind was filling with gasoline. Tonight, the invisible woman would see everything. The lawsuit had moved faster than legal speed usually allowed. Celeste demanded a pre-trial settlement conference in the hospital auditorium. It was a power move, forced Tessa to apologize publicly to drop the suit. The auditorium was packed with staff, board members, and local press. Celeste framed it as a town hall on integrity and accountability. Tessa stood backstage, the microphone heavy in her sweating hand. "Just say the words," her court-appointed lawyer whispered. "And it's over." Mason was in the audience, disguised in a maintenance uniform, cap low. He caught her eye from the back row, a subtle nod of encouragement. "Don't apologize. Stall." That was the plan. Celeste took the stage first, radiating benevolence and corporate grace. "We are a family," she lied to the crowd. "And sometimes family needs correction." She invited Tessa to the podium like a benevolent teacher scolding a child. Tessa stepped into the light, the glare blinding her for a moment. "I am here to address the accusations," Tessa began, her voice shaking. "I was accused of theft and disruption at the gala." Celeste nodded encouragingly, expecting the script she had written. "But the only thing stolen," Tessa continued, her voice gaining strength, "was the dignity of the patients in this hospital." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Celeste's smile froze. "I will not apologize for trying to save my brother," Tessa declared. Celeste stepped in, cutting the mic feed with a gesture to the sound booth. "Clearly, Miss Winford is under immense stress," Celeste said smoothly. "We will recess." She signaled security to remove Tessa. But Tessa shouted over the dead mic, her voice raw and projecting. "Check the basement. Sector 4. They're burning the records." The crowd erupted in confusion. Celeste looked furious, her mask slipping. Security grabbed Tessa, dragging her off stage for the second time. But the seed was planted. Reporters were already typing on their phones. Mason slipped out the side door, heading straight for the basement. He knew the fire wasn't a metaphor anymore. Celeste had ordered an actual arson to cover her tracks. Tessa had bought him time, but she had also incited a riot. Backstage, Celeste cornered Tessa, pinning her against the wall. "You just signed your brother's death certificate," Celeste hissed. "No," Tessa stared back, eye to eye with the monster. "I just signed yours." Celeste slapped her, a sharp, stinging blow that echoed in the corridor. "You have no idea what I am capable of," Celeste whispered. "I own the judges. I own the police. You are nothing. I'm the one who knows about the algorithm." Tessa dropped the bomb. Celeste froze, true fear flickering in her eyes for the first time. Tessa was released, but the threat hung over her like a guillotine. She met Mason in the emergency stairwell of her apartment building. It was 2 a.m., the hour of secrets and regrets. "Did you get to Sector 4? She asked, desperate for good news. "It was empty," Mason said, his voice hollow. "They moved the files." "What?" Tessa slumped against the concrete wall. "Then we have nothing." "No," Mason said, refusing to look at her. "I have something." He pulled a thick envelope from his jacket. "Celeste made me an offer." Tessa felt the air leave the stairwell. "What do you mean?" "She knows who I am." "She knows I wrote the code," Mason admitted. "She offered to reinstate my shares." To give me back my life. And my brother? Tessa asked, her voice barely a whisper. She said she'd clear his debt. If I give her the original source key. Mason looked at her, his eyes tortured. I can save him, Tessa. Tonight. By selling out. Tessa stepped back, horror dawning on her. By ending the fight, Mason argued. We can't win. She's too strong. You used me, she accused. To get a better deal for yourself. I'm trying to save you. Mason shouted, the echo ringing in the shaft. I don't want to be saved by blood money. Tessa screamed back. Then you'll die with your pride, Mason said coldly, turning away. I'm taking the deal, Tessa. It's over. He walked down the stairs, the heavy door slamming shut behind him. Tessa stood in the silence, the betrayal cutting deeper than any knife. The man she had trusted, the man she was falling for, had sold her out. She sank to the steps, burying her face in her knees. She was truly alone now. No allies. No leverage. No hope. But in the darkness, a thought occurred to her. Mason had left the envelope on the step. She reached for it, her hands trembling. It wasn't a contract. It was a drive. And a note. She's bugging the stairwell. I had to make it look real. This is the key. She thinks I'm bringing it to her. I'm bringing a virus. Wait for my signal. Tessa gasped, clutching the note to her chest. It wasn't a betrayal. It was a play. A suicide mission. He was walking into the lion's den alone to upload the virus. She stood up, wiping her tears. He was protecting her. But she was done being protected. She grabbed her coat. If he was going down, she was going with him. She checked the time. 2:15 a.m. The meeting was at 300. She had 45 minutes to get to the tower and save the man who saved her. Mason walked into Celeste's office, the prodigal son returning. Celeste sat behind her desk, a glass of scotch in hand, triumphant. I knew you'd come to your senses, Mason, she purred. Poverty doesn't suit a man of your intellect. Mason placed a black hard drive on her desk. The source key. Uncorrupted. And the girl? Celeste asked, picking up the drive. She's done. I broke her, Mason lied, his face a mask of stone. Celeste plugged the drive into her laptop. Good. Sentiment is a weakness. As the drive loaded, Mason watched the progress bar. It wasn't just uploading the key, it was waking up the sleepers. Years ago, he had buried audit triggers in the banking software. The moment she accessed the key, the triggers would fire. Every illegal transfer, every laundered dollar, would be flagged to the SEC, simultaneously. Irreversibly. It's done, Celeste said, seeing the transfer complete notification. Welcome back to the board, Mason. She extended her hand. He took it, his grip firm. There's one condition, Mason said. Name it. The town hall tomorrow. I want to announce my return personally. Bold, Celeste laughed. I like it. Agreed. Meanwhile, Tessa was in the server room basement, directed by Mason's previous map. She had bypassed the lock using the code he left in the note. She was physically connecting the hospital billing server to the law firm's network. Bridge the gap, his note had said. Let them bleed together. She typed in the command. The connection established. Suddenly, printers across the building began to whir. They were printing the deleted patient logs. Thousands of pages. Mason left Celeste's office, his heart pounding. He checked his phone. A text from Tessa, it's raining paper. He smiled. The physical evidence was flooding the building. By morning, the lobby would be carpeted in proof of fraud. But the real revenge was the timing. The triggers were set to detonate during the town hall live stream. Celeste wanted a show. He would give her a finale. He met Tessa in the underground garage, where it all began. She ran to him, hugging him fiercely. "I thought you left me," she whispered into his chest. "Never," he promised, holding her tight. "Tomorrow, we finish it. But you have to be ready." "For what?" "To watch her world burn," Mason said. "And to build ours from the ashes." The town hall was meant to be Celeste's victory lap. The auditorium was filled to capacity, investors and press packed in. Celeste stood on stage, looking every inch the titan of industry. "Today marks a merger of efficiency and compassion," she declared. "And I am pleased to announce the return of our prodigy, Mason Kellen." She gestured to the wings. Mason walked out, not in a suit, but in his parking uniform. A murmur of confusion went through the crowd. Celeste frowned. Mason took the podium. "I am Mason Kellen," he said, his voice steady. "And for the last 2 years, I have parked your cars. I have seen who visits late at night. I have seen what you leave in the back seat." Celeste stepped forward. "Mason, what are you doing?" "I'm auditing the firm," Mason said, pressing a remote in his hand. The massive screen behind him shifted from the logo to a spreadsheet. It was the whistleblower file, scrolling live transactions. "These are the bribes paid to the health ministry," Mason narrated. "These are the billing codes altered to deny coverage." The crowd gasped. Phones were raised, recording everything. "Turn it off." Celeste screamed at the tech booth. But Tessa was in the booth, having locked the door from the inside. She turned the volume up. "And this," Mason pointed to the screen, "is the kill command." The screen showed the SEC alerts firing in real time. "I just authorized the release of all internal emails to the DOJ," Mason said. Celeste lunged for him, clawing at his face. It was a moment of pure, primal loss of control. The cameras captured the elegant CEO attacking a parking attendant. Security rushed the stage, but not to help her. They were confused, the hierarchy collapsing before their eyes. "You ruined me!" Celeste shrieked, being restrained by her own guards. "I built this. I own this city." "You own nothing," Mason said calmly, adjusting his cap. "You're bankrupt, Celeste. Morally and financially." The doors burst open. Federal agents, tipped off by the automatic triggers, poured in. It was a raid. Live on television. Celeste was handcuffed in her couture suit, dragged past the investors she had defrauded. Tessa watched from the booth, tears of relief streaming down her face. She saw Mason on stage, standing amidst the chaos, looking for her. He wasn't looking at the agents or the cameras. He was looking for the woman who helped him pull the trigger. The humiliation was absolute. The empire had fallen. But the war wasn't over. The lawsuit was still active. And a cornered animal bites hardest before it dies. Despite the raid, the court hearing for Tessa's debt was still on the docket. Celeste's lawyers, paid in advance, were ruthless automata. They argued that the debt was valid regardless of the criminal charges. Tessa stood before the judge, Mason by her side as a witness. "The debt is a fruit of the poisonous tree," Mason's lawyer argued. "It was manufactured by a fraudulent algorithm." But the judge, an old friend of Celeste's father, looked skeptical. "The contract is signed," the judge grunted. "The debt stands. You have 24 hours to pay, Miss Winford, or assets will be seized." "My brother is my only asset," Tessa cried. "Then he will be transferred," the judge ruled cold-heartedly. It was the trap. The system protecting its own, even in the face of truth. Mason stood up. "Your Honor, I would like to submit new evidence." "This court is closed to new evidence," the judge banged the gavel. "Not this evidence," Mason said, walking to the bench. He placed a single document on the wood. This is the patent for the algorithm. Dated 10 years ago. It lists the sole owner of the IP. The judge looked at the paper. His face paled. The owner is Mason Kellen. Correct, Mason said, turning to the courtroom. I never signed over the rights, Mason declared. Every bill generated by that code is copyright infringement. Harrington Associates owes me royalties for every use. I am countersuing for 100 of the firm's revenue for the last decade. The courtroom erupted. The lawyers dropped their pens. It wasn't just a defense, it was a hostile takeover. If Mason owned the code, he owned the debt. I am acquiring the debt portfolio, Mason announced. And I am forgiving it. All of it. He looked at Tessa. Every single patient. Cleared. The judge had no choice. The legal ground had shifted instantly. Case dismissed, the judge muttered, retreating to his chambers. Tessa stared at Mason, shock radiating through her. You own it? She whispered. You owned it the whole time. I couldn't prove it until I got the source key from her computer, he explained. That's why I had to pretend to betray you. To get access. Tessa realized the depth of his plan. The risk he took. He had risked her hatred to save her life. She walked over to him and slapped him, hard. Then she kissed him, a desperate, aching collision of souls. Don't you ever scare me like that again, she sobbed. The news broke that evening. The parking attendant billionaire. Mason wasn't just the patent holder, he was the heir to the Kellen tech fortune. He had walked away from it years ago to build something on his own. Celeste had stolen his work, thinking he was a disowned outcast. She didn't know he had retained the voting rights to the holding company. The identity reveal shattered the remaining credibility of the Harrington board. They had been fighting the majority shareholder the entire time. Mason took Tessa to the roof of the glass tower. I hated this view, he said, looking at the city lights. It always looked like a circuit board of greed. What happens now? Tessa asked, shivering in the wind. We dismantle it, Mason said. Brick by brick. I'm dissolving the firm. Selling the building. And the money? It goes to a trust. For medical debt relief. You're giving it all away. Tessa looked at him in wonder. I don't need it, Mason said, taking her hand. I have my job. I'm a very good parking attendant. He smiled, the first genuine smile she had seen in days. Actually, Tessa smiled back. You're terrible at it. You talk too much. They laughed, a sound of release in the thin air. But the shadow of what they had been through lingered. Celeste was released on bail, pending trial. She stood on the street below, looking up at her lost kingdom. She saw the two figures on the roof, silhouettes against the moon. She realized she had lost to the two things she underestimated most: poverty and love. Mason looked down, seeing her tiny figure. She'll be back, he warned. People like her don't stop. Let her come, Tessa said, her voice strong. We know who we are now. Mason looked at Tessa. She wasn't the scared girl in the corridor anymore. She was a partner. A warrior. I have one more secret, Mason whispered. Tell me, she said. I didn't lose my access card that first night. I broke it. Why? So I'd have to talk to the pretty girl at the billing desk. The aftermath wasn't a fairy tale. It was messy work. Tessa's brother received his treatment, paid for by the Kellen Trust. But the legal battles dragged on, draining their energy. They lived in Mason's small apartment, refusing the penthouse. They were tired, scarred by the betrayal and the fear. Trust was something they had to rebuild, brick by brick. Tessa sometimes woke up screaming, dreaming of the stairwell. Mason sometimes stared at his computer, paranoid about new algorithms. But they had each other, and they had the truth. They walked through the park where they used to meet. "Are we happy?" Tessa asked one day, watching the leaves fall. "We're free," Mason answered. "That's better than happy. Happiness is a marketing term. Freedom is real." He wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. They passed the glass tower, now dark and empty, a for sale sign out front. It was a monument to their victory, and their pain. "Would you do it again?" Tessa asked. "Knowing the cost?" Mason looked at her, tracing the line of her jaw. "Idaho parked cars for 100 years just to meet you. And I'd scrub floors just to save you," she replied. They walked away from the tower, into the chaotic, beautiful city. They were no longer rich or poor. They were just Mason and Tessa. Survivors of a war nobody else saw. The camera pulls back, showing them blending into the crowd. Two invisible people who changed the world. And somewhere, a printer is still spitting out justice, one page at a time. The end. The invoice that started a war now lies framed on their wall not as a trophy, but as a warning. Mason and Tessa prove that even the tallest towers are built on sand when the foundation is rotten. But justice didn't come cheap. It cost them their innocence and forced them to see the darkness in each other. They aren't the same people who met in the rain. They are harder, sharper, but infinitely more real. If this story made your heart race, don't just watch, join the resistance. Subscribe and turn on notifications because the next file we open might be yours. Share this video if you believe the truth is worth fighting for. Check the pinned comment for the hidden detail you missed in the gala scene. We are just getting started.